Welcome y bienvenidos to the Cultural Capacity Podcast, an Educator Aid Incorporated sponsored learning tool. I'm your host and guide, Justine Gonzalez, and here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast, we are committed to exploring and supporting individuals and organizations on their journey of self-aware leadership, emotional wellness, and development of effective cross-cultural communications. Be sure that you check out each of the show's episode notes, where every time we're sharing free learning resources and tools, as well as text recommendations, workshops, trainings, and also featured guests in our monthly extended episodes where we feature thought leaders, both existing and emerging, across these realms of topics that we explore together. The design of our episodes, like this one you're about to hear, is where we typically spend around 15 minutes diving deep with one specific question. This is intentional by design, so be sure that you tune in throughout the whole episode. Tap into the show notes to explore and examine both the free and paid resources for you and your teams, the organizations you serve in. And be sure to hit follow, subscribe, or share when you find value and feel led to share with others. I'm so glad that I'm here with you. I'm so glad, most of all, that you showed up for yourself today. Let's dive in together and let's continue to live out our lives in a compassionately curious way that brings out the best in not only ourselves, but in those we interact with every day. Welcome y bienvenidos to the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I'm your hostess, Justine Gonzalez, and I am so excited to introduce you to the guest on this episode. So you all know, and I've been sharing this in our regular episodes we have, which are all designed to go really deep with one question in 15 minutes or less. But in 2023, which is right around the corner, we're going to be releasing these featured voices, which are extended episodes. So you're getting a very intimate, personal conversation with thought leaders who are not only already established in their industries, but they are perspectives and lenses that I hope as listeners you can take in and see another perspective. That's really the whole goal, not to convince you to think a certain way or be a certain way, but to help all of us as we continue on this journey of cultural awareness and better understanding ourselves and loving ourselves so that we can do the same to others we encounter. So without further ado, I'm actually going to kick off. She does not know that I'm doing this, but I'm kicking off with a screen share because because I love, so people like once they get into an interview with me, Martine, people know that I'm a major nerd. And I like to also really be like a cheerleader for people. So one of the things I want to draw attention to, and we're going to dive deep into her cultural origin story, because I'm just like the little bit I know about the pieces of your story, I'm just kind of mesmerized and I just find it fascinating, and I'm excited to be a learner as well. But Martine Kalaw is an author, speaker, and commentator on the human aspect of current immigration laws and policies. She is the CEO and president of Martine Kalaw Enterprises, a consultancy focused on providing human resources professionals with the time, resources, and confidence to drive diversity, equity, inclusion for organizations. Just simple, right? Simple, easy stuff. But one of the things we're going to come back to after she shares a little bit about herself is this incredible document I found on her website. And then also want to obviously share that she is a 2-time best-selling author. So she has written a text back in 2018 called Illegal Among Us, and then more recently, the ABCs of Diversity. So welcome, Martine. Thank you for letting me do this long little intro for you. And just wanted to see, before we hop into your cultural origin story and understanding, I think one of the things that captures me most is you immigrated at age 4 to the US.
That's correct.
From the Democratic Republic of Congo, but you are Zambian. You were born.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow. Justine,
Okay.
thank you.
So
Wow.
so you share what you want, but then I'm piquing the listeners' interest because that's what we're going to get into as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Justine. That was such a warm and thoughtful welcome. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and to connect with your audience. I introduce myself a myriad of ways. I introduce myself and identify as a stateless person survivor, an undocumented immigrant survivor, as well as a businesswoman. I run my own consultancy, boutique consultancy called Martine Kalaw Enterprises. And really, what that does, what I do in that consultancy is I make life easier for human resources professionals who are tasked with driving diversity, equity, and
Mm,
inclusion, and they feel like it's a burden on
yeah.
their workload. They feel like they don't have the expertise and they don't have the resources. So what my firm does, what my boutique does is we make it easier for them. We help them navigate so that they can get a seat, secure a seat at the table, and make DEI a business strategy, part of like the business within an organization. And so that's what I do. And it ties back to my origins of my journey of being stateless and being undocumented and wanting to create a bridge between those who have and those who don't have,
Yeah.
offer perspective, and allow people who are feeling underrepresented to regain their dignity
Mm,
and not be seen as charity,
mm.
not to see diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts as like charity work, but to see it as an investment, right? So that's what I learned through my own life experiences. And I take that into the business world to say, hey, DEI is not a charity thing. There is an impact on the business. There actually is a financial
Right.
impact and
Right.
benefit. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
Ooh. Oh, okay. I always do coffee hack. But one thing I wanted to be sure to say, so I do this for any guest we have on the featured voices episodes, but I share based on what I know because we've met virtually. We still haven't met in person yet, but that's important
Not
for
yet.
listeners to know. You can learn from people virtually. You don't have to
Sure.
always just meet at a conference or something. You can have genuine connection by showing up authentically as yourself. And that was something I was drawn to as I started like looking at the books you had written so far. But one of the things I admire, again, I don't know you. I would not say I know you super well at this point, but what I would say is I really admire your humble resilience. And you
Oh, wow.
highlighted that in what you just said, which actually was already standing out to me before you were talking about business world. But the little bits of your writing that I have read from you as an author is this I like the thing that I admire greatly because I personally struggle with it, right? Is but why can't we just understand this? Why can't we get along? But you have this grace about when I look at parts of your journey I know about or have seen on your website even where I go, this lady would have every reason to literally just be like, this is messed up and like condemning. But that
Right.
ability to have humble resilience, not only to make your way in the way that you have in the world and just be unapologetically you, but also calling people in, I think that is truly like just very admirable. So that's what I want to share as far as a point of admiration.
Thank you. And I can say that everything I've learned is through my journey of being stateless, undocumented, orphaned. It was really that during those formidable years was when that's really where I got my education, right? My schooling was through surviving and navigating those spaces. And what I learned was you can't people don't understand things from your perspective. They
Yep.
only understand it from their own. So screaming to people, shouting that, I'm undocumented, I'm stateless, I'm suffering, just doesn't resonate with people for some reason, right?
Yeah.
Um, shouting that, oh, I'm in an underrepresented group, I'm suffering, doesn't resonate. It's only when we find a way, a bridge to connect to their stories. And so
Mm,
that's what I've learned to do throughout my whole life is, let me pivot my lens. Let me understand, or try to understand, where this person is, and let me create that connection, that equalizer. And that way we can actually have a common language. We can connect. This is just my philosophy. I mean, I'm sure I didn't come up with it, of course, but it's really how I navigate through the world, and it's worked so far. It's worked well for me so far, and
yeah,
it allows me to be authentically myself, and it also it gives permission for the other person to be authentically themselves,
that's it. Yeah,
right?
that's oof. So
And say, oh, I've gotten feedback saying, Martine, you're incredibly disarming. Like, I sit sometimes with, I remember having a conversation with a white male executive who was telling me, like, he just didn't agree with the whole conversation around slavery. Oh, I think, Black people talk about it too much and such and such. And he felt safe enough to have those conversations.
that's
I
right.
completely disagreed.
Right.
I presented my,
Right.
rationale,
Right.
facts. That's all I can do.
Right.
And what I hope is, through that calm, he's
Mhm.
going to, pick something up later. It's gonna register maybe 10 years from now. So I just feel like that's a more effective approach for me.
Yeah. Yes. Oof. Well, I admire it. I have been told similar things, but I also know that I can get very ranty at times. So it's
I
a work
get
in
ranty too.
progress. It's a work in progress for sure.
I
So
love to talk. I get ranty
yes.
too.
Let's move into our first segment. We call this really exploring your cultural origin story, or getting to know the guest through part of their cultural origin story. And so for our recurring listeners and subscribers, you know that we are all about talking about culture, and culture is such a huge umbrella of our beliefs, our norms, our values, the symbols and language we use, those things that shape us. And then obviously, getting into cultural psychology and the systems that exist in our world, that's a whole other thing to examine and work in. But one of the quotes that strikes me, just to kind of go back before we dive into the specifics of some of your story, but I loved this quote too, for anyone, and it speaks to what you just said, Martine, for anyone who has ever felt invisible. I want to tell you that I see you, I hear you. And I think one of the things too, especially with DEI spaces, and for those of us who are facilitators,
Yeah.
sometimes I think people want it to feel nice because maybe they like our personality or they do like our approach, but then they still might feel very disarmed, or like, but that made me really uncomfortable. But I love how you have that quote on your page, because it was exactly the story you just told.
Yeah.
That man, whether I mean, he was wrong, but in that
Absolutely.
scenario,
But
he was absolutely wrong, and that needed to be named to him. But again, he felt comfortable enough to actually tell you. And in his world, in his mind, that was his way of feeling quote unquote invisible. Like, well, don't you see? This is always in my face. He just
right.
wanted somebody to hear him. So,
And it's the idea of acknowledgement, right?
yeah.
Acknowledging doesn't mean agreement, right? And I think that's a really key point to remember in the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you acknowledge someone, you
Yeah.
just validate their presence. It doesn't mean, oh yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
And really, I think at the end of the day, we all just want to be seen. We all just want to
Yep.
be heard.
Yep.
Right. And
Yeah.
so that's really ultimately what, this quote illustrates, that I acknowledge what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Do I agree? No, not always, but I want you to know that I hear it. And now may I ask for your permission to disagree and share my point of view, my perspective. And so that's really what, the conversation around uh, the conversation that's targeted to my communities, the
Mhm.
stateless communities, the
Mhm.
undocumented community.
Mhm.
It's that same conversation that I use and transfer into the corporate spaces when I work
Yep.
with, individuals, executives who are navigating DEI. And I also do want to share that I have a second website that's
Oh,
much more
you.
specific. Yeah, if you go to
Oh,
martinekalaw.com,
okay.
you'll
Okay.
also see that that is very much specific to the DEI work that I do, right?
Thank
So
you.
it's
This
almost
page
like
I
one.
visited before as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
Yes, yes,
So this is it allows for anyone in that, in an organization to navigate, the conversation on DEI, to know and see how they can work with me and the
yes.
offers that I can share with them. So I think this goes very well. It marries well with my second website, which is really a focus on my personal journey and connecting with other people's personal journeys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, let's get into this. So this
Yes.
is
Get
on
into it.
the other website that I was showing is called illegalamongus.com. And subscribers, please know as you're listening here, if you want to pause really quick and you go into the show notes, under our resources section, we will always share the direct link. So anything that I'm showing here, if you happen to just be listening to the podcast and not viewing this, know that you can click on these things and explore all the incredible resources that Martine and her team have put together. So let's talk. Let's talk about,
Yeah.
wow, okay, how does this 4-year-old Zambian woman who came through the Democratic Republic of Congo, what is this journey like? And I love that you also
Long
have
journey,
the
right?
dice.
So
The
yeah,
dice.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Justine, because I developed this because I wanted to create a visual to illustrate how this journey of being undocumented, of being stateless, is almost as it's like the roll of a dice, right? Rolling a dice. It's like, so I figured if I put it on a game board, people could actually get it, right? It's random. So being able to explain how I started, I immigrated to the US with my mother, from, Zambia through the, DR Congo, all the way to 2012, right? When I finally get my citizenship, right?
Mm,
How do I explain that? It's as random as rolling dice, because there isn't a prescription on how to get from point point A to point Z.
mm.
If I'm speaking to another stateless person or undocumented immigrant and they say, "Hey, Martine, this is the space that I'm in. What can I do to ensure that I have the same outcome?" The immigration system is so broken, right? And this is not
Mhm.
a political conversation, it's really a human conversation.
Yeah.
The system is designed for people like me.
Mhm.
It was designed for people like me to fail,
Yeah.
right? And so I therefore can't give anyone a direct answer. Like, if you do this, if you do that, if you do this, and you just follow my process, it will
Right.
get the same outcome. So it was really, it was created to show how random and how broken this system, the immigration system is.
It's powerful.
And
It's
so, and I made it as a game just to juxtapose how serious this journey is against how it's presented in the media, and how it's like, it's very convoluted. So ultimately, at the end of the day, to summarize, I came to the US as a visitor with my mother. I was on her passport. I was 4 years old. I was born in Zambia. My family, my mother and biological father, are from the DR Congo.
okay.
We came to the US through Congo, my mother and I. And we lived, I had a pretty normal childhood. My mother remarried an American,
Okay.
wonderful man who was, for all intents and purposes, my father,
Right.
right?
Right.
And everything was pretty good until one day the first shoe dropped, right? Um, my stepfather passed away. He was an American born, US citizen. He was working with my mom to get her to become a US citizen.
Right.
She eventually got her green card, right? So her
Okay.
permanent residency. And she was really working to help her other children. I was her youngest. So she had 6 other children in the Democratic Republic of Congo,
Wow.
suffering. I mean, this is a country that has gone through a 30-year civil war, right? DRC is a country that's rich with resources and minerals, but
Yep.
it's also plagued with war because everyone is kind of has their hand in the country. And so she was really focused on saving her children, saving her other children. In her ignorance, she figured I was here, I was okay. Her other kids had to come here.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of that, I remember it was as we were preparing for her US citizenship exam is when she died. I was 15. I fell out of status at that point, and I also became a stateless individual. I did not know any of these things because at that point I was simply trying to survive as an orphan at
Yeah.
15. Where was I going to go? How was I going to survive? Where would I get food to eat, right? And
Right.
shelter. And so I navigated through that through connecting with different communities, got into prep school through private scholarships, private funding, navigated through that. And in my college, my first year of college is when I was placed into, the euphemism is removal proceedings, but it's
Mm.
deportation proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's call a spade
Right.
here. And
Right.
that's what you see here. What you see in red are all of the logistical bureaucratic meetings and master calendar hearings and all of those things that created anxiety, extreme. I went through extreme depression, extreme anxiety, fear, because, I had a judge who was on a crusade to get rid of me. I could go more and more into all of this, but, for the sake of time, I will, be more brief. So this
No, you're
illustrates.
good. Quick question though. So again, so listeners are grasping this picture. This is you, all this red that's happening. And again, if you're just listening, I encourage you to click on the
Yeah.
links below so you can actually see this and or visit the site for illegalamongus.com. You'll see the visual on there. But this is all happening as you are also completely having been in your high school experience as an orphan and getting into college. So
Yeah, this is
while
happening
you're
actually.
navigating, while you're
I'm
navigating
living
the
global life.
status
Yes,
and all these red hearings,
that's right.
you're navigating being a first time college.
Yep, I'm navigating being a college student. I'm also navigating being an orphan
Yeah.
and making sure I
Losing
have a
your
place
parents.
to sleep and a home.
Yeah.
And that I knew the only way that I could secure that was through my education. My
Yeah.
education would offer me freedom.
Yeah.
However, because I was in this precarious situation, which I didn't quite understand myself, because this was a time where, 2003, nobody was talking about this. This was post 9/11,
Mhm. Yep.
where people were being targeted as they were being demonized, criminalized if they were undocumented. They were being targeted and marked as terrorists if
Yep.
they were undocumented. So I was navigating all of these things, and there wasn't a resource, there wasn't a nonprofit around that I could reach out to. Nobody was talking about it on TV. You were, for all intents and purposes, of an illegal alien. The
Yeah.
term
Exactly.
undocumented didn't
Yeah.
even exist,
That's
right?
right. That's
So
right.
navigating all of this, and the irony of things, like I had to go to a court in Buffalo, New York, but I didn't have an ID because, well, I was undocumented and stateless because unfortunately my mother and father passed away,
Right.
and I didn't know how to get an ID, but you needed an ID to get into the courtroom, right? The irony and the catch-22 of this is it's so convoluted. So
Yes.
in my my memoir, which is Illegal Among Us, A Stateless Woman's Quest for Citizenship, is where I explain all of that. I explain the logistics of it and how, the malpractice that I experienced with different attorneys telling me that maybe I should just get married, like really reducing it to like,
Yep.
and also wanting me to go against my belief of the sanctity of marriage And
Right.
also, by the
Right.
way, just getting married doesn't always work. It's very risky, right? I don't judge anyone who is able to do that, because
Yep.
it's not my place to judge anyone who's
Yep.
trying to survive. But at the same time, I want listeners who are not familiar with this to stop using Hollywood movies as a reference
I,
for,
yeah.
this immigration conversation, right?
Yeah.
Getting married is not, I know plenty of stateless people who are married and they're still stateless.
Yes,
So,
I do too, actually. So yes. Um,
so,
yes.
so I navigated through this. And so what the red is where you see it's trials, it's master calendar hearings, and in that space of, dealing with the same judge, and, there are all these different things that come up that are quite trivial. You go, I would get so much anxiety the day before my master calendar hearing. I would go into the courtroom with my lawyer, and the judge would ask me if I updated my address, and I would say, yeah, I gave it to my lawyer, and it turns out my lawyer never filed the update of my address, and the judge would yell at me and tell me to get out of his courtroom and come back
Wow.
another day. Things like that were always happening, right? So
Yeah.
that's where I talk about the dignity. I started to, like, my dignity started to erode. And in this space, when you're learning, like, there are different there are three ways that we define ourselves as human beings. It's through familial connection,
Mhm.
through our actual identity, who the country that we belong to, and how we see ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't have a family and I didn't have a country. So I started to believe that I was a nobody, because the judge was telling me, he said, you deserve to be deported. And so when you have all of these things that are working against you, you start to believe it, right? Your dignity is
Yeah.
completely
Yep.
lost. This system is designed for your dignity to be eroded. And so this is what I illustrate. And then the green is where things start to change, where there's hope. Ultimately, you see relief, immigration relief. So my case got sent to the Board of Immigration Appeals, the highest immigration court in the nation. They're also known for backlog and being inefficient. And so there was very little likelihood that anything would change. So then you see more red. And then finally you see that the Board of Immigration Appeals does something that is unfounded. Even my lawyer said, the likelihood of the Board of Immigration Appeals looking through and remanding a case and closing it and granting you permanent residency is like 1 in 1,000,
Yeah.
right?
It
They
doesn't
did that. And that is the only reason that I am where I am today, because they told the judge, enough is enough. We're making you give this woman
good.
permanent
Very good.
resident status. And
Very
he
good.
had absolutely no other way of navigating it except following suit. And that is why and how I am where I am today. But I also want to highlight that as much as I'm talking about the pain and the struggle and the journey of the 7 years of struggle, right? The 7 years of being undocumented and stateless, I acknowledge that there's some people that spend more, like they go through worse. They're in detention facilities. They are, they're harmed. They go through human rights atrocities in these detention facilities. They suffer, like whether they're in detention or out of detention
Yep.
for many years.
Yep.
And I know people who started with me undocumented back in 2003 who are still undocumented. And so that's part of the DEI conversation also, is recognizing my privilege. I think, and I believe, and I know deep down, and I acknowledge that being a woman, not being a certain religion, right? Not, and looking a certain way and sounding a certain way, probably was to my benefit and helped me. And I have to acknowledge that as well, right? And so in that DEI conversation, I also remind people that acknowledging our privilege doesn't mean that we don't deserve to be where we are. It just means that we acknowledge that, we had a leg up, we had a head start because of the way we looked, right? Things that we didn't have to work toward, that just came natural, is what allows us to have a little bit of a head start. And so what we get to do is we get to pull others who don't have that access
That's
into
right.
this space. And that's
That's
what I
right.
do.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that, first of all, thank you for doing a deep dive with this, because again, the document's just incredible. But again, if you are, especially I want to speak to people who might be listening and you're like, wow, perhaps you're a company and you hire and sponsor a lot of people for their residency, but you're not meshing that into your culture of inclusivity. To Martine's point, I know that is one of the things that I am super passionate about too, is making sure that we name things as they are. So I do want to ask you a quick question just for language definition, so our listeners hear this, but I also want to make a brief comment to speak to what you said, and I want to just note how you framed it and did it so that our listeners have a model. Because one of the things that I encounter often is people they feel guilty about who they are when they're learning about something for the first time that maybe they've just never experienced in their life. And so it's as simple as how Martine laid it out, or even myself saying on this podcast, I have privilege of passing as a white Latina, right? And even though in some umbrellas you hear all these terms, so my question is going to be about terms for you, but you hear these terms, especially in DEI spaces or that
Yes.
work
Yes.
spaces of, well, you're a person of color. And I used to get so actually even uncomfortable, even before I knew more about my cultural origins and all of that, even my own DNA and stuff. And I think, yeah, I guess, but also I'm white passing. So I
Right,
think
right.
it's also getting to this place where people are like, this isn't weird to talk about. It's just the truth. It doesn't diminish who I am or who Martine is or who anybody's story is, but to try to lump us in the same umbrella as, yeah, you both are persons of color. She's a
Yeah,
Black woman. I am
yeah,
not. I'm a white passing Latina. So I think even I always chuckle about it because people feel so uncomfortable just naming, yes, and I have a privilege because I'm white or white passing.
yeah.
And the thing is, we didn't come up with those things. The race was totally developed by humans to have power and control. That's it.
That's right. That's right.
So it's anyways, I'll get off that soapbox, but my specific
Construct.
question
Yeah.
was, what are some terms that people, if listeners are listening and they're like, all that I watch are maybe the news sometimes.
Yes.
What is the
So
proper terms for our listeners to know? Like, is there something wrong with when people are still using the term illegal or illegal aliens or undocumented? I have
right.
my own belief and my own values that I utilize, but I wanted to ask you, because you probably get that question often or you run
That's
into
right.
misuse of terms. And because you've also brought up this term of stateless, can you just break down like what are the terms people should use, especially if they're
Yeah.
listening, they're like, well, I've never met somebody with Martine's story. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think that that's such an important question in this conversation anywhere, because all of us we're now navigating in these uncharted waters where we don't know what to call someone. We're not sure what a person looks like on the outside, or how we perceive them is not necessarily how they identify themselves, right? So we don't know, and we don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to be shamed or blamed for being who we are, in the conversation around privilege, right?
Right.
And so what my first answer is, I don't have the answers, right? I
Right.
can tell you I prefer, but that doesn't mean that I speak for all other undocumented immigrants or all other stateless persons or all other Black women. You might meet another woman who looks exactly like me, my complexion, everything, who says, no, I'm not Black. Please refer to me as African American. Then you might go to the next woman and she might say, no, I'm not Black. Please don't refer to me as Black or African American. Please refer to me as African, right? Or Congolese.
Or
And
Caribbean
so that,
or
or
yeah.
whatever. So that is why I wrote the ABCs of diversity, to make that point. If we're so caught up in the jargon, we're going to miss the whole point of this. The whole point of diversity is connecting with people, understanding them from where they are positioned, right? And so we get to ask those questions, because whether you define yourself as Latina, someone else might define themselves as Latin,
Yeah, Latinx, Latino,
Latinx, Latino,
Hispanic.
right? And so if we're so caught up in, oh my gosh, am I going to say the right thing? We won't ever say anything at all.
Right.
Right. And then we're not learning. So where we got it, where we have to get to is a place where we can give each other grace to say, all right, if someone refers to me as something that I don't identify with, let me assume that their intentions aren't to hurt me.
Yeah.
Let me educate them. Let me let them know what I prefer to be called. Right.
Yep.
And then the other person on the other side has to get to a place of willingness to ask, but asking permission to ask.
Yep.
So that becomes something along the lines of, Justine, I'm just curious, how do you prefer to identify yourself? Culturally, ethnically, racially, etc. And then you get to tell me what works for you.
Yep.
And I don't get to assume that anytime I meet someone that looks like you,
right,
that means they have the same definer.
right.
So I would there. That is my philosophy. And that's really what I profess. So I say, I don't want, because a lot of these terms come from academia, right? We are in the real world. Academia is its own great and beautiful microcosm, but it should not be used.
Double-edged sword.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's beautiful, and also it can be
but it's, yes, it can feel restrictive and it's not clear. So some people, when I lead a workshop on conversations around privilege, the first thing I ask is, if we're not comfortable with the word privilege, what do we prefer in this organization? What do we want to call it? And some people say, I prefer fairness. I prefer blessings. I'm like, okay, well then let's we don't have to use the word privilege anymore. Let's use that word instead. So work within your communities to figure out what makes sense for you. And then also the individuals that you're interacting with who identify with those labels. So the label that I identify with is being stateless. And ultimately, I'm part of a great organization called United Stateless. You can literally just go on their website.
Wow. Okay.
So United Stateless, if you, the easiest definition of stateless that I will give you, this is more of like less the distant definition in a visual, that someone from United Stateless offered. So this is, I'm going to give that individual credit. But what they said was, if being undocumented is like being in prison, being stateless is like being in solitary confinement. So there are different ways in which people can become stateless. In my case, so stateless in layman's terms means you don't have a country that recognizes you as a citizen. No country recognizes you. So therefore you don't have any legal recourse. You can't, if something happens to you, if you're hurt, like you don't have any legal recourse. You don't have any country to go to. Like you're
just
just
bare minimum of
out there in the margins
on the planet. And it's that feeling that you go back to a dignity that I just can't even fathom, especially as a young teenager, navigating another country that is not your own anyways. And then trying to navigate all these things and knowing at the end of the day, but I don't have a home.
Yeah, you're citizens of nowhere, right? And at the end of the day, I'll throw out some statistics. According to the UN, every 10 minutes a stateless child is born. There are over 200,000 stateless persons in the US. There are over, I think it's 10 million stateless people in the world, right? So because of climate change, wars, stateless people are rising. They're more likely to be human trafficked because they don't have any legal recourse. In the guise of immigration, there are no laws for stateless people. So immigration lawyers are like, I don't know what to do with you. You don't have a country. We didn't write any laws or anything. And people become stateless for different reasons. In my case, I became stateless because the country I was born in didn't recognize me as a citizen, because based on their governance and their laws, I should have claimed citizenship by the time I was 18. I didn't know that, right? Because I was navigating being orphaned and undocumented. I didn't know.
Died.
Yes, and my parents, the country, the DR Congo, where my parents were from, also wouldn't recognize me as a citizen because one, they changed their whole structure. They went from Zaire to DR Congo. I should have been
Oh, okay.
citizenship. So therefore I wasn't a citizen of Congo. The US didn't recognize me. So therefore I didn't exist anywhere. Just to give you another illustration of how a person can become stateless. So, we saw horrifying images months ago of Haitian migrants trying to,
Yep.
cross the border, and you
Yeah.
saw, border patrol with
Yep.
whips, and people were wondering, why can't they just go back to Haiti? Well, many of them are stateless
Yep.
individuals, right?
Yep.
Meaning that they were born in the Democratic Republic of in the DR, the
La
oh,
República Dominicana, the
yeah,
Dominican
Dominican
Republic.
Republic. They were born
Which,
in Dominican
again, if you all
Republic.
know any about the historical division
Yes.
and the facts of Haiti and how they were the only country to overthrow, like so look into that if you
Historic
don't know about that.
racism in Dominican
Yep.
Republic. These individuals, they're Black, they were born in Haiti. Most
Yep.
likely their parents were born in Haiti. They were born in Dominican Republic. Most likely their parents were born in Dominican Republic. So we would all think they're Dominican.
Yeah.
Well, a new law, not new, it's about a couple of years old now, was instituted in Dominican Republic that was truly and completely racist, but was to whitewash Dominican Republic. And the law said, if you are Haitian, ethnically Haitian, and you were born in Dominican Republic, well, you're no longer a citizen of Dominican Republic, all the way predating back to 1940 something.
Yep.
So what does that mean? That means all of these individuals, these Black people who are from and born in the Dominican Republic, should be citizens of the Dominican Republic, no longer have citizenship in Dominican Republic. Their parents don't, their grandparents maybe don't. And they also don't have citizenship in Haiti because they weren't born in Haiti. So guess what?
Right.
They are stateless. They have no country to take them in.
Thank you for sharing that, because it's such a great real-time example as well that I think maybe a lot more US citizens probably saw those stories and heard about that recently in the past years, but just understanding that context. And like I said, if you don't know historically, and that's a whole other soapbox I get on for sure, because there is so much colorism still prevalent in Latino cultures, Latine, however you choose to
it's across so many cultures.
It's across, you see it. And it's a whole other conversation, but I am passionate about that because it's
every culture.
It's
right.
It's
and
so
it's how all these cultures internalized racism, right?
And perhaps they're unaware.
Yep. In India, like it's all over, right? But I wanted to explain it in that context because one, because it's so relevant and apropos to what's going on now. Two, because I'm sure anyone who looked at the images and read the articles and watched the news would never have known that, because the media does not choose to tell that story, right?
You showed the pain. You showed us the pain and re-traumatization again.
Right.
But what's the history under that and the context that needs to be understood? So thank you for entertaining. We normally have this segment, right, that's called frequently asked questions, and I wanted to ask you that specific one because I wanted you to share some of your expertise with just language and your own perspective on that with the listeners. So
I appreciate that. No, I was just going to say, the only thing I would say is, the term illegal alien, I am almost 100% certain that anyone who is in an undocumented space would perceive that is extremely derogatory. Nobody is an alien, right? Now, whether someone refers to themselves as, unauthorized or undocumented, that's to be determined by the individual. Some people, in my community and in the African community, use the term of like not having papers. And I know that extends beyond just, African communities, and it's just like sin papeles or something, right? Like not having papers. And so, it's just, So there is a framework, right? There are things that we know that are blatantly like derogatory. So I'm not suggesting those are okay. Those
That's
are like not
yeah, and I
okay.
wanted to very explicitly put that out there for people because a person is not an alien, a person is not illegal, they're a human being. And so when you use a term that is not relevant and is also very harmful and continues to perpetuate oppression, like the term illegal alien, that in itself, it actually still dehumanizes that person.
That's correct.
So I just
Correct.
want to make sure that people heard the differences very
That's
clearly defined between stateless, undocumented,
right.
dreamers, like all these things
And
that
look, there are I think it's all intentional in some way, like, the way that everything's sort of encapsulated into one. And the takeaway from this is not that you have to remember all those distinctions, because
right.
immigration is this really convoluted ecosystem, right? The difference between TPS versus a refugee versus an asylee versus a
Yeah,
migrant versus an immigrant, it can be really confusing, right? And so when we're seeing everything in the news, and we just get really confused, and then what we shouldn't do is shut down and go, oh, this is too much. What we get to do is at least connect to the story from our own frame of reference, from our own understanding. Well, what would it feel like?
right, right.
What might it take for someone to want to come, leave their country, risk their entire life
Yep.
to come to another country where they probably aren't wanted? What would it take? What are they going through? What must their life be like?
Yep.
That's all we get to do, right?
No,
Connect
and
to it.
that's what I try to encourage people as well, just having like personally knowing people who have been very impacted and also part of different cartels. And that's what I try to break down for people to understand, like, look, nobody wakes up and decides I'm going to sell my body or I'm going to start selling drugs. Like
That's
you
right.
usually are doing these things, or you even know what could happen if
Yeah.
you're trying to jump a wall or cross a border or a river, you know. So that, to your point, like even from an empathy level, if we can even wrap our heads around, and I've asked people actually in different groups I've facilitated in workshops, and I've asked, if things got so rough in the US, would you do anything possible for you and your children, your spouse, your partner, etc.? Would
Yeah.
you like cross over to Mexico or Canada? And these are United States workshops based people. And hands down, I've never had a participant say no. Hands down, everybody, even if they had shared disparaging views previously in the workshop about immigrants,
Yeah.
they, hands down, I wouldn't even think twice about risking my life for that. So that's
That's
the
right.
other piece, right? If we can just try to understand a small piece of what that might, like what that helps you understand. Like nobody's deciding, yeah, I'm going to sneak into another country and just fly under the radar. Like nobody's planning that.
And here's the great equalizer. This is what I always remember. Everyone is hungry, and everyone's trying to feed their families. This is what I remember when we see different community situations. At the end of the day, we all have you know, one objective, and it's to feed our hunger and make sure our families are fed too. That's really when it comes down to it. Now, that the approach that people take differ based on their experiences, based on the bodies that they're in, based on the
Yep.
communities that they're in, and the access and the privilege that they have.
Yep.
That is what shapes how and the measures that people will take. But if you're hungry and your child is hungry, what would you do to
Yeah,
satiate that
that's
hunger?
right.
That's the question.
That's right. Whew. Wow, this
Thank you.
has been such a great episode. I've like
Yeah,
been, I
I
could
love
talk to
it.
you forever. So, but I do want to ask you one more question before I have you shamelessly plug anything else you
Oh,
want to do. But or anything you might have coming out. But I do want to ask this question, just you personally, as you think back to little Martine. So little being anytime you were 10 or under. And we know already from hearing parts of your story today that those were very tumultuous times for a number of reasons. But is there a key principle you can trace that you go, I
Yeah,
still live by that now? And that was also little Martine, because I'm such a proponent personally of the power of inner child work and working
yeah,
through our own trauma and grief, and have seen that just be really helpful in my own journey in life. So I'm always curious, because I think so much of us is hardwired already from birth. Like, we do know who we are, and the world tells us differently, and we have to unlearn that and relearn and tap back into that intuition.
yeah.
So what is a principle that little Martine lived by, and you still find yourself going, "Yep, that's still me."
That's me. Absolutely. My philosophy in life is you create it by imagining it first.
Mm.
That was this was me, little me, when I just navigating life, from the time I was in, my formidable years to my teenage years, I was a daydreamer. Little did I know that in those daydreams, I was really creating, I was manifesting the life that I was going to live
Yep,
20 years later. Little did I know that I still do that, right? I imagine, I live, I am a magical thinker. I mean, this is what makes me allows me to remain childlike. I'm always imagining what could I do? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to travel? All of those things that I've imagined, I've created.
yep,
Right? And so that is my philosophy. See it in your mind, picture it, imagine it, create it in your mind, and then let it come to be.
yeah.
It
Would
doesn't
you
always happen in the time that you think it
Oh,
will, not
yes.
the way that you think it will,
Yep,
right? But once you create it in here, right? It just like your heart opens and there's possibility. The probability may not be likely, but the possibility starts to build. And that's really what it comes down to when I talk about dignity, is to remind people that anything is possible,
yeah,
right? Even if it doesn't seem probable, and that
yeah.
their
Ooh,
voice, like they have something. We all have power, even when we feel powerless. What is your source of power? Right? It's finding that and living from there.
woo! Well, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you just so much for just being open and
Thank
sharing
you.
vulnerably and sharing your heart and your passion, and also letting me I always thank guests for letting me batter them with questions.
Oh, this was not a battery at all. This was
Okay.
wonderful. I just felt so present, and I
Likewise.
could be myself, and this was really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. So, final question, is there anything specific? We've shared your two websites,
Yes.
martinekalaw.com, and then you have illegalamongus.com. We've talked a little about your books. Is there anything else you want to shamelessly, we say,
Thank you.
unapologetically promote yourself that you either are excited about, you have coming out, ways that people should connect with you?
Yes. So two things. I will be on a panel with SEALed, which is an organization discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that it will be broadcasted afterward. So,
Okay.
tune in. It'll be updates will be on my website,
Okay.
on my martinekalaw.com website.
Wonderful.
But I offer every month, I offer a free master class to individuals, particularly those in human resources professions, who are looking to find ways to really drive diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations. And so in those 60 minutes, we talk about the 5 things that you can implement in the next 90 days to begin to see a shift
Great.
in DEI. So I encourage
Ooh.
listeners, especially in those spaces, to join, pass it along to other people. And if you're not an HR human resources practitioner, you're still interested, please join.
Well, that
You're
sounds great.
welcome.
Well, I need to join. Well, so where exactly do people sign up for your
You
masterclass?
can it's on my website. You can
Okay.
register for the master class. Yes.
Yay.
On my martinekalaw.com. I should be
Okay.
very clear about that.
No, I mean, it's
Martine Kalaw.
great. That's what we find, right? So many of us who are in the space of social impact and public service, we
Yep.
are we're on boards, we're doing a lot of projects and collaborative things and all that. So, any social media stuff that people should connect with you, or that you like that?
Yes, if you go, I like to keep it simple for people because if I mention too many things, it's hard to remember
Okay.
all of it. But if you
Yep.
go to either one of my websites, it will redirect you to my social media, my Twitter, my Instagram, YouTube channel, as well as Facebook group. It's all at the
Great.
bottom of all of my websites. So
Well,
that
I
makes
need
it
to make
easy,
sure
less
I'm
to remember.
following you on the platforms too.
I'm gonna do the same.
Look, see,
I
people,
want to follow
listeners,
you.
you have to know when you listen to podcasts, like a lot of times we are running so fast and we're connecting and we're like, yes, this is awesome. And then we forget to do some of those like initial technical things like, oh, am I connected with this person? There was one
I'm definitely
I had
connecting
like
with
done
you.
multiple projects with him over a year, and we
That's so
just started following each other. So
you're like, wait a minute, wait. Yeah, that's no,
we're
that's
connected in
for sure.
real life first.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, that's where the relationship really unfolds, right? So that means that's just a testament to a great relationship that you have with that person. So
There you go. Oh, thank you. Well,
yeah.
thank you. And listeners, subscribers, please reshare this if you found value. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Martine, our fabulous guest on this episode. And let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Until next time. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for showing up for yourself today and also tuning in to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. We couldn't do this show without the help and support of listeners and viewers in 2023 when we will add our extended episodes to our YouTube channel. So please search Educator Aid on YouTube and subscribe now. We are in the process of officially launching that channel. Haven't been utilizing it for a number of years, and we're excited. We're excited to have you join in on these powerful conversations where we are going to be having some extended episodes and you get to sit down and tune in and learn from some incredible thought leaders. So again, thank you for your commitment to yourself and your own personal learning as well as professional development journey. I thank you for being here, and let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care.